This leads us to Section 3, and I'll talk now about Operations Underworld and the relationship between the Mafia and the different intelligence organizations. Now, in order to understand the history of the Church Committee and Frank Church himself, first you have to understand the history of the intelligence community after World War II. In 1947, when the National Security Act was passed, it formed the CIA and not too long after that, the NSA, which nobody knew about until at least the 1970s or 80s. And almost immediately after the CIA was formed, it began an umbrella project called MK Ultra. The MK Ultra project was not just one project, but it was an umbrella of many sub-projects underneath it. Like what I mentioned before involving Operation Mockingbird, which was the influence and/or control of media personnel or media companies themselves, or Operation Underworld, which during World War II, the intelligence organizations of the War Department worked with the Italian, Jewish, and Irish Mafia to secure the docks and get intelligence information when invading Italy. Operation Gladio was an ongoing operation between the foreign intelligence offices and the different mafia organizations internationally that worked to overthrow governments, stoke civil wars, and arm rebel combatants both for the right and the left. And the American Mafia Commission was oftentimes the contact to initiate some of these operations. Now, the Church Committee was formed because Frank Church not only began to question U.S. government backing of the corrupt Vietnamese government, fighting the even more corrupt communists of the North, he also saw that it was not Congress that was overseeing much of the foreign intelligence and foreign policy. This led him to investigate and conclude that there was no congressional oversight of any intelligence organization at all. There was simply appropriations committees that gave money to them when they wanted it, and that was it. Well, years later, he finally got his wish, and he formed the Church Committee after an era of distrust from the American public of the U.S. government and its mishandling of the Vietnam War, FBI and CIA running illegal operations, assassinating people, drugging, harassing, and assaulting, and even killing U.S. citizens, and so forth. The preceding years already solved the investigations of the Watergate scandal, the Pike Committee, and the self-investigation of the White House Commission under Ford, which was a farce. There was even the passing of the RICO laws against organized crime in 1970, but it was not enforced until more than 10 years later. Now, I mentioned we would tie back to Church and the Church Committee and what that has to do with Jimmy Alo and Tommy Sobek. So the Church Committee not only concluded there was massive amounts of corruption, massive amounts of illegal activities from all the intelligence agencies, including the FBI, but it was the first time there were laws created against foreign bribery and interests into other countries. They also started the FISA courts, which required all intelligence organizations to come to Congress first to get a warrant in order to investigate people or put them under surveillance. The most striking issue, though, was that they began calling federal witnesses and those in the mafia organizations that they found out worked with the CIA to assassinate international leaders, including Fidel Castro. 3 people in particular were Johnny Roselli, Sam Giancana, the boss of the Chicago outfit, and Orlando Letelier. Sam Giancana never made it to the committee to testify. He was found shot in the face, and according to my intelligence, it was Tony Accardo and Joey Aiuppa that took him out because the commission thought he was going to squeal. But the real shocker I came to find out later on was that before he could testify, Johnny Roselli was killed and put into an oil drum in Miami by none other than Tommy Sobek, and it was Jimmy Alo that gave him the order to kill. The very man that gave him his button is the man he had to put to death because all indicators showed that he was going to squeal. What a shocker. And as far as Orlando, he was killed in a car bomb in Washington, D.C. before he could testify. Now, the Church Committee, at least regarding the issue of the Mafia, would not have been able to put the dots together if not for one man that was probably more instrumental than anybody in closing the gap on the Mafia, and that man's name was William C. Sullivan. Sullivan was in the FBI for 30 years until 1971. In the last 10 years of his career, he took over the COINTELPRO, or Counterintelligence Program, that was run for Domestic Intelligence or Division 5. That was the third in position in the FBI. Now, the reason why that happened in 1971 was because in 1957, it was the beginning of the American public to truly realize that the Mafia was not just individual criminals, but a national and international syndicate. That was when the Appalachia arrests occurred. In fact, after years of Hoover denying that the Mafia existed and claimed it was just a bunch of hoodlums, it made him extremely embarrassed to have to finally launch an investigation into the matter after Appalachia. Of course, he made the current COINTELPRO head take the fall, who was Alan Belmont, and replaced him with Sullivan in 1961. Now, immediately after he got in, he told Sullivan to launch an investigation and draw a conclusion on the existence of the Mafia. And then within a year and a half or so, he produced the definitive internal memo that was circulated only internally at the FBI with Hoover, that the undeniable evidence proved the Mafia existed, and it was far more than what Hoover could have planned. Now, this is also damaging to Hoover because it also led to the exposure that there was no oversight for the FBI. As a result of this definitive document that was produced by Sullivan, it led to the Valachi hearings of 1963. And that was when Valachi turned on Vito Genovese and got the first major indictment and conviction of a Mafia member. Within a few years, this led to the federal government's victory to pass the RICO laws that eventually would destroy the entire structured Italian Mafia. The reason why it didn't affect the Jewish Mafia and the Russian Mafia, which was technically Jewish, is because they didn't organize in the same format as a feudal system like the Italian Mafia did. And so it was more difficult to get them under RICO laws. This precedence of at least two major victories of the federal government to go after the Mafia in America laid the foundation for the Church Committee to definitively go after the CIA and use them and their Murder Incorporated for assassination for hire operations in joint military intelligence and Mafia ops. So there you have it, the origins of my Mafia knowledge and the research and interviews as it started from Jimmy Alo, and how he played a major role in the founding of the American Mafia Commission with Luciano, Benny Siegel, and Meyer Lansky, and how he and Tommy Sobek were directly involved with the assassination of Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana. Until next time.
Now